How can a digital infrastructure investment firm impact sales cycles for data center businesses? So, how does a company that is primarily in the business of being an investor in digital infrastructure impact sales cycles for data center businesses? That is a terrific question because companies that provide venture capital or private equity for digital infrastructure for data centers, almost certainly, if there's a significant equity stake, are going to be holding board seats, board of directors seats for an individual company. And because of that, essentially the CEO, the CMO, the CRO, the chief commercial officer, they all basically report to the board. So those board seats allow your investment company to hold a tremendous amount of power over how digital infrastructure companies go to market and potentially address sales cycle length. So one of the things that I have seen across the board among digitally savvy VC and private equity firms, PE firms, is the idea of getting the similar stakeholders from different companies together for events on a pretty regular basis to share best practices. And sometimes it's peer-to-peer learning, sometimes it's bringing in experts. But say, for example, you're an investment company and across your portfolio, you have a dozen strategic investments in and around or adjacent to digital infrastructure. And presumably in all of these 12 companies, there's a head of sales, there's a head of marketing, there's a head of product, there's a head of account management, there's a head of channel partnerships, what have you. And you decide that it seems like the sales cycle length seems like it's much longer than what the benchmarks would show for the digital infrastructure industry. So regardless of whether this is an in-person event, if it's geographically convenient, or a webinar series, you basically invite the heads of marketing and the heads of sales for your portfolio companies. And maybe once a month together, you're just talking through best practices on sales cycle acceleration. And maybe every so often you're talking about offline events and online events and webinar strategy. You're talking about how to better do customer insight research, both initially and on an iterative basis, how to better segment leads in CRM, how to do better email marketing, personalization, customization, account-based marketing, all of the typical strategies that a chief revenue officer, a chief marketing officer, a chief commercial officer would talk about internally, except you're hoping to cross-pollinate all of those best practices across all 12 companies, all 12 revenue teams, all 12 go-to-market teams throughout your full portfolio. And again, peer-to-peer learning is fine. If there's subject matter experts that are part of your own team as the PE or the private equity company or the venture capital company, they can feel free to moderate. People can take a turn teaching to their peers if they have that expertise, or you bring in speakers. But that's essentially would be the best way for a digital infrastructure investment company to impact sales cycles, to improve sales cycles for data center related businesses, is start with education. And then, of course, you could potentially have leaderboards, transparency dashboards, where assuming that you can truly do apples to apples across your portfolio company, which may not be possible because most investment companies typically like to have some degree of diversification. They really don't want to have portfolio companies feel like they're on a collision course as direct competitors with each other. But to the extent that you can normalize or have a reasonable degree of parity across the metrics, you could potentially have some transparency as well. So different companies, different portfolio companies can see overall how the group of 12 is doing with impacting their sales cycle length based on different demand generation experiments, sales enablement experiments that are being run. So at a high level, that's what I would look to do. If you're doing virtual events or in-person events, of course, engage in the best practice of recording the events. If they're in person, hire a videographer, put the slides and the transcripts and the recordings in a wiki kind of area, protected area that just your portfolio companies can get access to. So as new people are hired, they can go back and watch the highlights and recaps and everything. And over time, you're essentially running like a sales cycle acceleration or demand generation sales enablement kind of academy or university that's unique to your portfolio companies to help them get a competitive advantage. So that's what I would think about for a digital infrastructure investment company that wants to impact sales cycles for data center related businesses.